Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you may be today. The warmest of welcomes to this webinar on behalf of International Media Support to mark the launch of a new report that we have been working on called Where is the Money? A global perspective on forms of funding, financing and investment for public interest media. My name's Claire. I'm Head of Journalism and Media Viability at International Media Support. I'm the editor of this publication and I'm also your moderator for today. So as I said, a very warm welcome to all of you. A little bit of housekeeping first. We are recording so that we can be able to share this afterwards, and that's why your cameras will not be enabled. But we would love to hear from you. The chat is open. We would love to hear your reflections, your comments, and of course your questions. This is very much the beginning of a discussion around this topic, and we'll have plenty of chances to follow on with you. So please do take the opportunity to do that. And I'm lucky to be joined by some great colleagues today who will be helping us monitor that chat. So please do post your comments. Our new report is really 2 years in the making. The first phase really focused and was rooted in the MENA department here, the Middle East and Northern Africa team, but was also characterised by a lot of internal reflection. And then this second phase, which has featured these 4 different chapters and different regional focuses. So that's what makes up this published version that you can see. The team that's involved has also developed a very long and comprehensive set of briefings for us here, and there'll be plenty of chance to follow on with that over the coming months and years. The motivation for the study really was from many different dimensions, but we really wanted to understand and unfold this question of viability more deeply for our media partners. We wanted to cross-pollinate knowledge from one region to another. We also wanted to inspire new conversations because this question of viability is a very, very difficult one, and understanding where there might be potentially new entry points around forms of funding, financing and investment is really important to us. We're not naive. We do understand how much of a challenge this is. So I haven't unfortunately got a golden bullet answer to the question, where is the money? But nonetheless, I think when you dive into the report, you'll see a lot of detail, some great case studies, and lots of perspectives that really try to unfold what the role of intermediaries like ourselves might be moving forward, and how we can build on this knowledge. So the report is really situated in a backdrop of many different initiatives that are forming now. The OECD principles, of course, that came out in May, really called for more focus on this, more increased levels of financing and other forms of investment for media. So the report speaks very loudly into those principles. And then there's also a lot of other initiatives taking shape, not least the Media Viability Manifesto, which we've been involved in and that launched a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully what we're about to discuss today will help shape a little bit more of a compass to help navigate some of this territory moving forward. And I'm delighted to say that the agenda that you join us with, we've got some great colleagues that we'll be hearing from. We're going to start by speaking to Guy and Mira to really situate the report in the global landscape. And then we're going to move to the chapter authors. I'm delighted to be joined by, first of all, Ross, an independent researcher who's headed up our Asia research. Then there's Chris, who's leading at the Digital Arts Africa. He's helped us with the Africa chapter. And then there's Hassan and Alexandre, who've been from the Febrayer network, looking at the MENA region. And finally, Laura and her colleague Janine, who've helped from SembraMedia, who'll be helping us understand the landscape in Latin America. And then, as I said, hopefully at the end, we'll have a chance to move to some questions. So I'm going to turn first to yourself, Guy, if that's all right. You're here obviously in your capacity as the chair of IMS's board, and also all the experience that you bring to the table from UNESCO, and all the other engagements that you've had over many years in your career. You've kindly written the foreword for the report, which talks about the need for holistic solutions to media viability. I'd really just invite you to reflect on that, really, what that means to have holistic solutions, and what maybe were some of your key takeaways from the report. I pass the word and the floor to yourself, Guy.
Thank you so much, Claire, and hello, everybody. Exactly, Claire, this is a holistic problem. That's why it says an holistic, I don't know, holistic problem, which the report shows, because it's a problem that depends on lots of variables, such as press freedom, self-regulation, the wider business environment, market research, and the possibilities thereof, advertising industry, competition and tech policy, media leadership, audience relationships. So if you're a bit dazzled by those kinds of factors, I'm sorry, but these are the different variables and more that have to be considered. And of course, here's the challenge, because if we want journalism to survive and thrive, we have to see progress on all these points and more, and not just one of them. And then you have the challenge, because we can't tackle them all at once. We have to really build an ecosystem, the kind of coalitions and alliances and division of labor, to make sure that there's progress on all these fronts. And then we also have to prioritize where each of us fits in as regards what our affordances are, what our possibilities are to make change. So I think in that light, you can treat this report as a kind of buffet of options that are possible for all kinds of combinations that can be suited to different countries and different regions and different actors. But at the end of the day, the buffet has to be seen for the totality that it is. Now, I'm very proud to be chair of IMS with outputs like this report, and big congratulations to Claire and the authors. But I want to express a few personal views also, and I want to underline that. These views are based on, I'm feeling old, 30 years of engaging with media viability. The first decade was in the crucible itself as a media manager, and that was at the now defunct South newspaper in South Africa, which helped to bring down apartheid, but which had to close when donor support disappeared all too quickly after the first democratic elections. Perhaps that sounds familiar to some of the people listening here. In the subsequent decade, I was a journalism professor, and there I was a board member of a centuries-old newspaper that had to close its offices and stop its print edition in order to survive. And in the same period, from a research and training point of view, I was involved very much in creating a diploma and a unit on media management. And more recently, in the current decade, I've been working at UNESCO. I've just retired 2 years ago. And this was looking at media viability from a policy point of view. And I also worked as secretary for a UNESCO program called IPDC, International Program for the Development of Communication. And that was a grant maker. And so I tell you all this because on the basis of what amounts to holistic, to use that term, holistic learning, from some successes and many failures, here are my personal points. So to jump in, I've only got two, but the first one I want to say is that, of course, we are seeing by the day information and integrity taking a beating. And we see big tech and big AI continue to disadvantage news media enterprises. So in this context, it's really urgent that the main international donors should contribute cash if they want independent media to play what we all know as a unique role in development and democracy. And that means more funding to help pay the bills and to push for innovation and to advocate for national policy changes to deal with the market failures, which are killing journalism. And not to mention the need for funding to combat the failures of platforms and of law enforcement to protect journalists and end impunity for those making death and rape threats against them. I just remind you that in 2nd of November, International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. It's a day that should be used to call for justice for journalists. Now, in this context of crisis, I think sadly the most urgent need is to keep even the existing level of donor support, even though what we need are massively increased and elevated inflows. And I say this because of the Open Society Foundation's very recent announcement that it's closing its media support program. So instead of growth in media support, we see the opposite beginning to happen. The OSF, Open Society Foundation leadership, seem to think that disinvesting from journalism and switching funding to AI is somehow going to solve society's international problems. Dream on, that's all I can say. As far as I know, the OSF made their decision without any proper human rights impact assessment, let alone the courtesy of consulting stakeholders. Now, the reality is we've lost OSF to what we were all interested in. Our task is now to ensure that these kinds of similar, arbitrary, and acute changes in other major donors are preemptively discouraged. I'm very glad Mira is talking after me because I want to suggest that GFMD could convene an urgent roundtable to, one, discuss what went wrong in the case of OSF and invite them to help us understand why they dropped media from their support portfolio. And the second purpose of a roundtable is to involve existing donors in the discussion because there's now a big gap that we have to urge should be filled. And we have to address any concerns that could see remaining donors thinking about emulating OSF's strategic example. We all remember how most social media platforms followed suit after Elon Musk began slashing trust and safety teams at his company. My fear is that this OSF amputation could trigger what you could say is a similar self-harm to the objectives of such organizations. And that self-harm to their own effectiveness has the effect of harm to independent media, to information integrity, and the public as the primary casualties. So in short, Mira, we need more joint engagements with the donors at the highest level possible and from a united media development sector. And for this, we need mechanisms for better communication, coordination, and transparency within the international donor sector and those in the media development sector. GFMD, history is calling on you now. And we need everybody in media development to set aside differences and have a common front on this matter. The second point I wanted to make from my 3 decades of learning here is that the theme of the study is where's the money? And of course, we know donors are one very important place where this money exists. But I think we can also ask a complementary question. Where is the voluntary support that does not need money? Because we all know the amount of non-monetized inputs into media, not just community media, is already admirable and essential. And even for those people who are paid in media and media development, they're also putting in a huge amount of unpaid labor to help make journalism fly. Now, I acknowledge that such in-kind inputs can't replace the actual need for cash. But besides for helping to subsidize the costs, I think this resource can also help to bring in more revenue. So one of our challenges is to upscale this resource in many, many ways, including ways that can lobby media donors and policymakers about the value proposition of support for independent media and media development. And I say this because this is not least in the times of AI, and because over time, what we're going to see, the outputs of AI as a new force of production these outputs will degrade in proportion to the shrinking supply of new data sources, and that shrinking supply resulting from a continued decline in news media economics. So to summarize what I've said, 1, we got to urgently engage these donors. 2, we have to unite the sector. 3, we have to upscale the efforts in kind that can help independent journalism to survive and hopefully to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guy. I don't think anyone could be in any doubts about the gravity of the situation and the challenge that is in front of us, having heard your reflections there. So in response, Mira, I'd love to pass the word to you now, not least based on Guy's comments, but also some of the key findings in the report. Really, how should the sector respond to the study's concerns of the lack of coordination and long-term strategy that is so badly needed? And also these calls for more kind of localized approaches. And you're really very appreciative, we're very much appreciative of your reading of the report and your reflections. So I'll pass the word to you now, Mira. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it was extraordinary to have an opportunity to read the report that has so detailed and great regional insights. Mostly we have global reports. They're very general, and then very little knowledge about what happens actually on the ground in different countries and in different regions. This is a great contribution to that. And of course, I had speaking points that spoke to this, but now that a Guy has put me on spot, I have to use a minute or two just to respond. Guy, as you know, you were in one of the most powerful positions for advocating for journalism and media in your latest UNESCO career stage, and you know how difficult it is to move the needle not only in terms of funding and concrete support, but also in understanding and political will to respect some basic human rights and fundamental freedoms that we all promote. And unfortunately, international situation at the moment is not speaking in favor of independent journalism and free expression. So not only that we are facing a shrinking space in terms of donor support and some of the philanthropic support, we are also facing a lot of, as you know, other challenges. So I would say that yes, of course, we will do our best, and I'll consider what we can do. We can have a chat about it. But what I read from the report, now going to the report, is that there is this big question: what do we consider as our sector? And often when we speak from these international shoes, we refer to this 350 to 500 million support that comes from international donors and philanthropy organizations. And we think then, what is the sector that channels that support and what does it do? However, when you read this report, especially the part that comes from local experts and authors feature in this report, the sector that they talk about is much larger. And so that they emphasize, and very literally, that media development funding constitutes only a small, often, as we heard, decreasing and insufficient portion of the sector. And Claire, you were talking about this shift that we, especially in the international community, need to make, is to kind of think about the sector not from this top-down approach, how much money we have, what are we implementing, and then thinking about the strategies and needs, but the other way around, and that's what we've done within GFMD. We see the sector as small and medium-sized journalism organizations that adhere to ethical and professional principles in line with their context, of course, striving to survive and nowadays define their own industries and sectors. And so these are the organizations that form the sector. And then the reports highlights this. And then if we're talking about the strategies and what we can do to support that sector, if you take what their needs are and that comes through from these regional reports, you inherently have already a strategy. And that is contextual strategies driven by these organizations, their leaders, and their representative bodies. And that's where I agree with Guy. Very often organizations, when they make these big decisions on, what to fund, whether to fund, don't start there. So another clear insight from the report is that there are two very distinct areas of concerns in all these regions. One is this support for journalism during emergencies and crises. And so you have struggle, of course, of journalism organizations to survive at all during what we have now as more and more conflicts and wars, emergencies, climate emergencies, other emergencies, crises, economic downturns, and of course, journalism and media in exile. And in many countries that we could read in this report and in other reports, donors and funders really play a crucial role in supporting independent journalism. And Claire and Guy, you've mentioned the OECD principles, and they have been built from the bottom up. So they actually incorporate a lot of guidance on how donors and implementing organizations can improve these support mechanisms and ensure that they are more effective, better coordinated, and of course, locally driven. It's a long road. I mean, there is a report from USA that has very precisely set targets for localization. And they say that unlike their target of 25% investing in civil society organizations that are local, they are at the moment at 9%. And you would be surprised to hear that actually media development support is among the best of the sectors with the most diverse set of recipients and implementers. And in many regions, that figures are over 25%. That's far away from being good. And we point that very often, the how assistance is designed and projected actually is not driven from the bottom. So it doesn't really matter if you give money to the organization, but all the rules and themes and boundaries are actually driven from the top. The other bucket, and I'll wrap up there, is developing industrial policies for journalism as a public good. And that's something that comes really clearly from the report, that in every region, you have organizations, representative bodies, and leaders that are doing some serious work on trying to define. We have an example of CEO of Daily Maverick, who has developed a very comprehensive list. And these include tax incentives, subsidies, even compensation for assets that are recovered as a result of investigative journalism. And of course, these actors are often not well supported. But this is a completely different bucket, and that requires a different set of support and a different approach that's not infrastructural. It's more kind of a looking at the puzzle and then seeing where you can make the best leverage and support those advocacy and policy, as Guy has said, those actors that can make the biggest difference in their context, in their countries.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mira. That's really, really rich reflections. It was interesting. One of the points that I had also from thinking of GFMD was what can be done to embrace and encourage this rich range of new actors that are going to be needed in the space to move this dial at lots of different levels, whether that is different types of investors or whether that is different types of advocacy support. So I think we'll be able to continue those conversations. Keep your questions coming for those of you who are listening in today. Please do put your questions and we'll endeavour to get to those. Now that we have this sense of the challenge from the insights from Guy and Mira, we'd like to take now the chance to hear from all four authors of the report. We're going to go across to Ross first. Who's been looking at the landscape in Asia. Obviously, we're limited by time today, so what the authors are really trying to achieve here is just to spotlight a few points of their key takeaways, their potentially where they see inspiration or key factors that are happening at play in their regions. So Ross, I pass the word to you really to kick us off, hopefully with a sense of where do you feel is the money in Asia, and do you see any openings at all there? So I'll pass the word to you, Ross. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. So I'm going to probably parrot a bit what Guy and Mira just said. The approach we took, and having now read my colleagues' sections of the report, I think everybody took, is much more of an ecosystem report. We looked at it more like economists and less like media operators or journalists. And in that, I can say a couple of things. Overall, where is the money? The money is out there. There's not a lot of it. It's actually pretty thin if you're a media operator, public interest media operator in Asia. And a lot of it is locked up. So think about the ecosystem, in discussions with media and funders and investors in Asia, the analogy to the climate crisis comes up over and over again, that just solving a pollution problem at an individual factory, while important, doesn't solve the problem. The problem continues, it's just briefly mitigated in one particular place. And so we took an ecosystem approach to look at the entire space. And, one thing that I can say is that grant funding, so if you look at grant funding in Asia, it's quite small, especially relative to grant funding for media development in Western Europe or North America. But it's also quite small versus the rest of the media ecosystem. Advertising is a multiple billion-dollar a year business. Even reader payments for virtual content, so news or music or entertainment, is also now a multiple billion-dollar business in Asia. We're just not a very big part of it, the public interest part of media. And so figuring some of that out, how to unlock, the term unlocking local capital, unlocking local money, whether it be from individual readers and the audiences and communities that public interest media serve, or from local donors, local philanthropy, or even local government, as Mira was referencing. So that's number one. Number two, I think all four regions had a similar situation. I guess we felt it very acutely in Asia, and that's we talk to people in three different worlds. So there are journalists still working in what I'd consider, partly because the Reporters Without Borders annual report shades these black, but we have a lot of black on the map of Asia. So journalists working in China or Vietnam, Laos, increasingly in Cambodia, they're still working there, but that market is almost impossible to intervene in. So we've kind of stepped away from that, other than just understanding their world. The second is the exile movements that have grown out of those markets, and they're everywhere in Asia. There's probably a dozen of them. The two we spent most time with were in Myanmar and Afghanistan. And then the last is the kind of the large, functioning, aspiring media, public interest media markets. And these are markets that have functioning economies, functioning legislative processes, policy think tanks, media support, local media support organizations. And in those markets, they're quite large in many cases. There is some opportunity. So I thought I would turn to that to start, try to be a little upbeat to start the morning. So first of all, membership and donor programs. When I first started working in Asia about 20 years ago now, the idea that people would pay for news online was considered folly. I remember I used to work in Hong Kong, and when Malaysia Kini launched its subscriber program, we all thought they were nuts. And yet here we are today, maybe almost 15, 20 years later, and the program is still live and thriving. And you see those programs, especially in markets where the financial infrastructure is strong, they continue to show success. And so there is a bright spot there, whether it's membership programs, subscription programs, donor programs, but this is releasing money, unlocking money from the local audiences, communities, and donors. The challenge we heard from a lot of people was that it's not a simple process, right? You can easily spend a lot of money and not get a lot of money back. There is a real expertise in building these programs, acquiring the technology, understanding the consumer, building the pricing. And so there is a real need for networks. There is a real need for scale. Anything that is built on a big platform, whether it's a subscription platform or a financial platform, a CRM, so a customer relationship management platform, there's generally a very high fixed cost that many smaller public interest media can't engage in. So finding ways to build networks, create scale among public interest media, and supporting regulation. So this goes back to what both Guy and Mira were speaking. A lot of places, the local regulations don't support the holding or the acquisition of consumer information, or if they do, it makes the donors and the subscribers quite vulnerable to government questioning. So the first opportunity, there is definitely something happening in membership and donor programs, but we need to kind of step back market by market, because these are very much market. How you do it in Indonesia will be very different than how you do it in Thailand, which will be different again than how you might do it in the Philippines or in India or in Pakistan. One of the pieces here that we heard a lot about among exile media movements is diaspora donor programs. And I regret to say that to date, I haven't really seen in the interviews that we did, haven't seen any of them that are actually dramatically contributing to media viability. They create a lot of headaches. Sometimes they force the media to redirect their reporting to the diaspora communities themselves. So I think the verdict is still out on membership or donor programs to support exile media from diaspora communities around the world. Advertising and sponsorship programs, very similar situation. About 75% of online advertising in East, Southeast, and South Asia is mediated by Google, Meta, ByteDance, so TikTok. And so again, you have these big tech platforms, and for those to work, you need scale, right? The difference between getting a penny per 1,000 views and getting 10 cents a 1,000 views is often scale, the data acquisition you have on your consumers, how you present it. And in the advertising space, there were lots of mentions of, say, government advertising. How do we work with local governments to the extent we can to make that a more transparent process, make it a more fair process? And so there is an opportunity in the advertising space again, but it's going to require local, so market by market work. It's going to require scale. It's going to require networks. And it's going to require supporting regulations, ways of making the ecosystem work more smoothly, more fluidly. One of my big takeaways was that there is global money from philanthropies, from government aid agencies, from international aid agencies, even from international lending organizations, but it isn't enough. And the trick is finding ways to use that, in my opinion, to unlock local money in places like Indonesia, in Thailand, in the Philippines. There are local philanthropists, there are local donors, there are local family foundations who also believe in the role of public interest media in the development of their societies. They just don't have the support and somewhat the risk mitigation, the protections that we have. It's all well and good if you're, say, an American funder, because it's unlikely that government will come after you. If you're a local funder, there is that risk, and finding ways to use global money and global influence to mitigate that risk so that you can unlock local capital is going to require a lot of experimentation. And it's, again, going to be market by market. It's going to require some innovation, and it's going to require a lot of localization, which in my experience in discussions with global funders, it makes them a little nervous. Lastly, capacity building. And I say this with all respect to the work that independent journalists, public interest media operators, publishers do in these markets, but there isn't a lot of capacity out there. I mean, there are media operators out there that aren't well formed. If I were an investor, just a classic commercial investor working, say, in North America or in Europe, I would find the lack of well-formed media operations in a lot of these markets. And so the work that people like IMS, MDIF, IFPIM, Intranews does in terms of capacity building, the short-term financing that some of them provide to support the capacity training, it's all important, but it's almost not sufficient. And in some ways, it needs to be coordinated. Let's just say I sat in a conference room in Chiang Mai and watched a media operator pull out the training schedules of a couple of these organizations. Many of them are the same, different timing, different relationships, but very the same. What are the challenges? And this is, I think, going to be, I'm sure that when the other authors talk, some of these are going to sound familiar. The biggest challenge in my experience, in my work on the report, was the exile media movements. There are a lot of people that are working, a lot of international money is working on this, but at the same time, it feels, if you were an exile media operator, it feels very crisis driven. So a lot of people were like, just waiting for the next crisis, right? It feels incredibly under-resourced. It feels uncoordinated, and in many cases lacks a long-term plan. So, what do we do in the event that this crisis goes on for a decade? Again, in Asia, we have exile media movements that have been working now for 70 years, right? The Tibetans have been reporting on the situation in Tibet from Dharamsala, or from DC, or from the UK, or from France for 60, 70 years now. Localization, to do this, we have to work locally. We can't work, and in some cases even regionally, at a subnational level. And it is more than just individual media, it's the entire ecosystem. And that means that to unlock this money, there's going to be a need to work with national regulatory environments, because they are generally the two most regulated parts of an economy, finance and the media. Lastly, focus right now. One big challenge I find, and this is specific for the philanthropists, the international media development industry, is very focused on individual media. There's not enough policy focus, and I see that changing a bit, but and the question is, how do we not impoverish individual media by shifting toward more policy? You kind of need to do both. But changes in the environment may be more important than fixing or supporting any single media. And lastly, media management and finance talent. There's just a general lack of financial talent, both, and not to be overly critical, both among grant funders. Grant funders are generally journalists, past media operators. They're generally not financial. I have yet to run into a CPA among any of my interviews, well, with the exception of commercial investors. So there are opportunities out there, there are challenges, but overall, I think the theme for at least the Asia section of the report was to create enough supply of capital for public interest media we're going to have to do some ecosystem level work to unlock money that is available locally, whether it's at local governments, whether it's local philanthropy, local advertising, and all of that's going to require more money from global philanthropy, as well as a more localization, more in-depth work at the local level.
Great. Thank you so much, Ross. That was really insightful. I think it is extremely rich, the Asia chapter. I think there's some really interesting points around the increase in creator voices and the disruption in effect that has also on the slice of digital advertising that's even existing for public interest media. And then I think there's also some really interesting themes that come out not only from the Asia chapter, but also elsewhere from MENA and Africa about local funds and the appetite and readiness to create those. So thank you for bringing so much of that to life for us just there, Ross. So we're going to go across to Africa now, where I felt the theme came through for me, Chris, with your research around the need for advocacy, not least through the work of the Law Society going on there. Also key points around diaspora audiences and the potential that there could be a new actor, a new set of actors there, as well as, of course, these themes of local-based philanthropy. So we pass the word to you now, Chris. Thank you so much for explaining some insights from the Africa region.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire, and to colleagues and those that have joined us. I could have taken a Ross presentation, just taken out Asia and put Africa there. And I think we could be speaking of the same territory. Maybe next time we do Africa-Asia experiences. But thanks so much, Ross. If you just allow me then, Claire, to just point out a few things that came out of what's obtaining on the ground. One thing that was quite clear was the overriding nature of political and economic pressures on the news media in Africa. And we take one example, which is advertising. The advertising market in Africa is very small. It's only 1% of the global advertising revenue in the that obtained in Africa. Now, out of that just 1%, you can go to a country like Kenya in East Africa, and you'd find that a newspaper there or a media platform, 50% of its revenue is advertising from government. So that advertising now becomes political if government decides otherwise, to punish you for certain, what they might call indiscretions or not towing the line. And currently what has happened in Kenya is that the government used to advertise on a weekly basis via 3 newspapers. Then it went to tender and gave it to one small newspaper. Everything, all the advertising now from government is channeled for print, is channeled via this one newspaper. So the Law Society of Kenya has challenged that and gone to court around that these public funds cannot be used in this way. There must be equitable, distribution of advertising funds. So this is the kind of situation that obtains across the continent. If you go to Zimbabwe, all advertising, by government goes to state-controlled media. They're not even public media as such, small party-controlled media, as it were. And the other media, private media, do not get a slice of that. Then by the same token, the public media in these countries, or the state-controlled media, they're actually the ones that have got the widest reach in most cases. And there's a struggle for a viable model for these media, transforming them into true public broadcasters or media, for the people. So that's one area that is an area for intervention or for advocacy. Then the other things that are obtaining that do help the media a lot are theme-based grants. So if you go into East Africa, the biggest media group is called Nation Media there. Nation Media gets grants in health, climate, from the Gates Foundation and others. And this does help in a lot of ways in it being to sustain those bits, especially health and climate. Then you also find that in Southern Africa, USAID has stepped in to support investigative journalism. So there is a $12 million grant over 5 years that they will be giving out to one entity to support investigative journalism in the region in Southern Africa. So these are things that are coming out in terms of theme-based grants. But one of the things that's quite interesting that's coming out, especially out of South Africa, is the establishment of local philanthropic organizations. So we have seen the establishment of Millennium Trust and Raid Foundation. And these specifically, they do support the media. The Millennium Trust supports investigative journalism outfits such as Amabungane, which has done quite a lot of work in unraveling or revealing state capture in the country. So these are things that I think, developments that I think we would call positive in the country. But there is also money that's coming in via international organizations. The establishment of the International Fund for Public Interest Media's regional office in Ghana, which is in West Africa, is a very positive development. Positive in the sense that they've come onto the scene to support quite a lot of newsrooms across the continent with grants. But I think most significantly, the alliance of IFPAM and the Media Development Investment Fund, MDIF, especially around what MDIF calls the Amplify program, which is not an investment program or a financing program, but where they do funding, coaching, and look at revenue and audience generation kind of models for startups especially. That, I think, has become, in many ways, a game changer in the region. So there's Amplify South Africa, there's Amplify Nigeria, and in a few other places. So I think that this is important. At the same time, MDIF has continued to do investments, especially in small startups. So you'll find that they've supported startups like Scroller. Scroller is a mobile journalism first platform, but also significant in a place like South Africa, Data Light, where the cost to communicate is quite expensive. So they've continued to do that, and that is to be encouraged. Then the other thing that is happening in the region, in South Africa, which is, I think, is a precedent, is that the South African Competition Commission instituted what they called a media and digital platforms market inquiry. So what they wanted to find out was really the impact on the ability, the impact of the big tech on the ability of news media to distribute and monetize their content online. So this inquiry, which took place early this year into mid-year, really looked at the whole value chain, your social engines, social media sites, video sharing, platforms, trying to understand if there's distortion or impeding of competition. Now, this is significant in the sense that the provisional report of the Competition Commission will be out in November, and it has got so much in terms of implications, not just for South Africa, but for Africa. And I would encourage that the colleagues that are online be on the lookout for that. Then the other thing that is happening, especially South Africa, Kenya, Senegal, within South Africa, there are moves now to set up a national journalism fund. The provisional name is a Media Sustainability Fund, but that name might change. But plans have gone so far in setting it up. But the key for me is that there is corporate appetite. That means corporate South Africa, there is appetite to contribute towards this fund. And I think the mobilization of local resources might become one of the key kind of ways of supporting media on the continent. Then there are other things that are being tried out, which also Ross did point out to. At the diaspora, there's a huge diaspora of Africans outside of the continent. And in terms of remittances, they remit quite a number of billions a year into the continent. So a number of media organizations are trying to tap into that. From the research I did, there were not many that had succeeded in tapping into that, but they were coming up with strategies as to what could appeal to the diaspora audiences and how could they put money into this. Then finally, there was some good news, which I found surprising. In Kenya, in East Africa, which was that Gen Z was interested in actually subscribing to news, especially from nation media, if this news was bundled with something that was practical for them, that related, for example, to their professional careers and all that. So there is something that is there that is happening. So it's not all doom and gloom. So just to come then to the final part, Claire, and I'll not go through everything here, but some of the challenges that we have spoken about, let's say around government allocation of advertising. As I said, in Kenya, the Kenya Law Society has engaged in litigation against government. But this is an area for advocacy. But we also need to monitor indirect pressures on certain parties from advertising on what is then termed maybe problematic media. This happens in Zimbabwe a lot, and we need to be alert to it. Then the other is really engaging with philanthropic organizations, foundations based in Africa. We've got a number of billionaires that have set up philanthropic organizations, but these focus on education in the main. We need to engage with them in order to unlock those funds. But the nice thing about it is that we are seeing the setting up of organizations such as African Philanthropic Network. And I think that the media, those of us in the media fraternity, could begin to engage with them around around the channeling of support to the media. Then I did mention the setting up of the regional funds, national funds. I think this needs to be supported. Maybe sharing of experiences, especially the South African model, because IFPAM is actually helping on the technical side in the setting up of this fund. So rather than certain countries reinventing the wheel, there could be certain maybe a template that comes out of that they could then localize in their own spaces. Then I did mention what is happening with big tech in South Africa. And I said that we need to look out as to what will come out of that report. So thank you so much, Claire and colleagues.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. We will, of course, be watching out for the findings. As you said, that could hopefully create some sort of a blueprint in terms of ways to move forward with these negotiations in a relevant way. We're going to head across now to the Middle East Northern Africa team, and Hassan's bringing to life the findings there. Of course, an incredibly difficult set of circumstances in light of the regional conflict escalation and the almost unimaginable pressure that is putting on media in lots of dimensions, and not least, of course, the viability. But I know your research, Hassan, lent very heavily on some quite original empirical data. So we're really looking forward to hearing where you perhaps see openings for where might be the money in the region there. So thank you very much.
Of course, Claire. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you here today. To better explain the situation in the MENA region, I will start with some quick remarks. First, most independent media started operating after 2011 Arab Spring, which means after the collapse of the traditional business model that supported media for decades. Second, we must take into consideration that the debate about the collapse of the traditional business model is a theoretical discussion in the MENA region, because the main source of money has always been political money. Now, the field is mainly dependent on donors. All the public interest media we consulted in the region consider donors' grants as their most important revenue stream. And they believe these grants will continue to be essential in the future. The sustainability of independent media in the region without donor support is an aspiration. It's more like a mindset for the media, as one of the interviewees in the study put it. But the good thing is that this mindset is set now. Most of the independent media outlets are exploring various revenue streams, on average, 3 income sources per outlet. Can we move to the next slide, please? A quick look at the revenue streams of media outlets that generate a portion of their budgets shows that 6 out of 7 most common sources involve providing services to third parties. It is today the most successful revenue stream in the MENA region. Next slide, please. Many outlets consulted in our study offer content production services or tech services or training to third parties. It's the most successful revenue stream in the MENA region. All 4 media outlets that generate 50% or more of their budgets rely on this revenue stream. The same goes for 5 out of 7 media outlets that generate 25% of their budget. What is interesting about this service-oriented approach is that it mainly depends on in-house expertise and skills. So it can be started at almost 0 cost. But most public interest media that focus on offering services mainly work with niche markets like NGOs or international organizations, which limit their income potential. So we can say that it's a circulation of donors' money somehow. And because of that, there is a real need to diversify revenue streams and expand to a larger clientele, especially to private sector. Thank you. As one of the media professional explained, media can also generate revenue by selling to an audience via sales, membership, or subscriptions, or by selling their audience. That means advertisement. Let's start with the selling to an audience method, which is in another terms monetizing the audience. So far, the subscriptions and membership models some media outlets tried have not really paid off. The outlets are still struggling to find what products of value they can offer to readers. Here, focusing on a niche is a key for making money, I think, making money from an audience. What has been proven to work are specialized products. People willing to pay for content want something that directly helps their work. We have an example of a newsletter for professionals interested in Egyptian affairs, and it's working. Here, another point, there is a huge potential in selling to the diaspora audience, even targeting them in crowdfunding campaigns. A Lebanese outlet raised 60,000 in 2 years from such campaigns. Many other media outlets have found that a good portion of their memberships and donations come from diaspora communities. So the Arab diaspora is really a promising but underexplored source of support, and exploring this more could really pay off. And move to the next slide. Thank you. The other possible source of revenue is advertisement. Two outlets succeeded in generating around 30% of their budget from advertisement. The returns from programmatic advertising from big tech are low, extremely right now. However, the situation could change a bit for media outlets as the talks continue about licensing agreements for integrating media content into artificial intelligence. We will see. And while programmatic advertising offers low returns because of the pricing dynamics dominated by big tech, direct advertising continues to be a significant revenue source for independent outlets. Some media professionals believe there is a big market for ads, and if independent outlets can grab a portion of the $7 billion market in the MENA region, that will help them to generate enough money to be sustainable. This is a very optimistic approach, not experimented, yes. Another slightly more cautious, optimistic approach is seen in a project that focuses on attracting what they call like-minded private sector advertisers instead of the big brands that hesitate to advertise in independent media to keep good relations with authorities. This approach is still new and it's hard to evaluate its success. Can we move to the next slide, please? This is an interesting one. We noticed a correlation between the size of an outlet's budget and the revenue it can generate. Of the 18 outlets with budgets over $250,000, 13 are making money, while 5 are not. In contrast, of the outlets with budgets below $250,000, only 9 out of 30 have managed to generate any income. We also found a link between team size and revenue generation. For outlets with more than 20 employees, 8 out of 10 are generating revenue. But for those with fewer than 10 employees, only 8 out of 26 are generating revenue. And of those, 4 generate less than 1%. So it's maybe nothing. These numbers are encouraging and suggest that helping medium-sized outlets to grow could significantly reshape the landscape. Beyond donor support, media organizations need to invest in business development expertise to make this happen. And scaling up needs to happen on 2 fronts: production and staffing. Expanding production capacity allows public interest media to reach a wider audience for advertising and audience-based revenue. Additionally, increasing team size and bringing in business professionals can improve their ability to offer services effectively. Can we move to the last slide? Yes, thank you. We've talked about the positive aspects, but that doesn't mean there aren't any challenges. In fact, there are many, and I will quickly go over some of them. The poor economic situation is in most MENA countries make it difficult to build a solid business model for public interest media outlets. Another challenge, there is a lack of secure payment methods, with many people not having debit or credit cards. Some also believe that their transactions can be tracked by authorities, so they hesitate to support public interest media because of that. Also, the close link between economics and politics discourages private companies from advertising in independent platforms for fear of government backlash. On another side, public interest media outlets are often operating in the dark, really in the dark. There is a shortage of reliable data on the news industry, market research, audience behavior, trust in news, advertising, and consumer habits. This limits their ability to improve operations. Another point that stakeholders have pointed out is the lack of skilled professionals in the MENA media market, particularly those who have both journalism and business skills at the same time. Also, by their nature, independent outlets challenge prevailing opinions, especially on social issues, aiming to promote human rights for marginalized groups. This limits their audience, as their content can diverge from mainstream views. Lastly, there is a serious threat to safety and security, which perhaps I should have mentioned first. Threats like intimidation, violence from both state and non-state actors, risk of imprisonment, office raids, forced interrogations, etc. But to end on a slightly more positive note, I want to highlight that out of 43 organizations we consulted via a questionnaire, 19 expect to become profitable or self-sufficient within the next decade. And this really gives us hope about the future. Thank you very much for listening, and I encourage you to read the report, and I hope you will find it insightful. Thank you.
Hassan, thank you so much for all of this and for taking the time to be with us as well today. I would really encourage those of you who are interested in quite a fundamental discussion actually that takes place in the MENA chapter, which is about whether or not we should be thinking about scale or niche. And I think it is quite fundamental to the debates around where is the money and unlocking that those new potential channels for financing. So we're all sending, of course, our best to those of you in the region there. So thank you very much for being with us, Hassan. Laura, again, another extremely rich study from the Latin American cases, particular pertinent case studies I found where you've really managed to look under the hood of the impact of algorithm changes on the advertising. You also have to say paint a rather bleak picture a little bit as we began with Guy over the availability and flows of donor funding into the region. So the floor is yours really in terms of just navigating us through what you see as some of the practical takeaways and practical potential entry points in the region there. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Claire, for this introduction, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here and contribute to this conversation. And to answer your question, Claire, I want to start saying that when we work on this report, we knew that we could not take one-size-fits-all approach. As in the other regions, Latin America has a unique political, economical, and social characteristic. However, some unifying aspects have emerged, particularly around political crisis and economic instability, which make sustainable media funding especially challenging in Latin America. And even that, in this challenging landscape, one promising trend is growth, and that is the Global Funding Initiative, especially designed for independent media. And I want to highlight two key examples. The International Fund for Public Interest Media, that some of the comments are mentioned, and the Press Forward Initiative in the US. These initiatives mark an important shift, bringing together donors to establish more stable and sustainable funding pools. And that couldn't come at better time, as overall media support in Latin America has decreased in recent years because major donors, as Guy mentioned before, including Open Society Foundation and the Google Initiative funds, have scaled back, while others, like Meta, for example, have cut all funding to media altogether. IFPIM and Press Forward hope to fill this gap by convincing new donors to public interest to support public interest media. However, we know that they don't come without limitations. For instance, because IFPIM is such a large fund, they are limited to providing relatively large grants to more established outlets. And this means that it's limited funding option for smaller media, which, despite their vital role as this media has in their communities, they often lack of the revenue levels and administrative resources needed to meet these requirements. Another issue is the geographical limitation. In Central America, for example, only Costa Rica qualified for IFPIM support, while Costa Rica is a vital refuge right now for exiled journalists. This narrow eligibility excludes independent media across the Central America region that also urgently need funding. The next slide, please. But, well, we find another, no, the previous, sorry, yes, thanks. We find another opportunity, a small but encouraging emerge of new philanthropic funding sources from private donors within Latin America. You are seeing right now the webpage of Luis von Hahn Foundation that was created by the co-founder of the language app Duolingo, who is originally from Guatemala. This foundation supports human rights and economic development in general, all initiatives from Guatemala, including contribution to some NGOs and media organizations. But while this is a promising example, I have to note that local philanthropic funding is still very rare in Latin America, where there is a little precedent for private donation and are few, if any, tax incentives. The next one, please. But, well, although more grant funding for media is clearly needed in Latin America, independent media leaders are not passive waiting for solutions. Many have developed creative ways to diversify their own revenues and reduce their dependency on philanthropic funding. And I want to talk about two examples. One inspired example is El Toque. El Toque is an independent media organization that was started in Cuba in 2014. El Toque's founder is now living in exile in Miami, where he managed a team on and off the island who produce daily news, analyses, investigative reporting, live streams on social media, podcasts, and mobile apps. But by far the most popular feature on the front page of El Toque is the box that you are seeing right now in the screenshot that shows the informal currency exchange rate of the Cuban peso, the euro, and the US dollar. These exchanges rates are updated by the El Toque's team using a system they developed using machine learning to process data from a large number of public and private sources, including informal currency exchanges, private messaging apps, and other places where the people offer to buy and sell pesos online. This work also led the Cuban government to denounce El Toque as an enemy of the state. But the engagement and the connect with the audience is incredible in El Toque. El Toque will not have survived without international grant support. And despite their many challenges, they have been also able to diversify their revenue and build a remarkable resilient news organization that covers one of the most complicated countries in the world. Now, the next one, please. To appreciate the diversity of the media we have studied in Latin America, I want to share a second example from Brazil this time, JOTA. JOTA meets a unique demand for timely expert insights in Brazil's complex legal landscape. They provide in-depth news on legal and regulatory issues in fields like tax law, energy, and judicial affairs. This targeted approach has helped JOTA attract a professional audience willing to pay a premium for this specialized newsletter. They have used the revenue to build a financially successful independent news organization, and they have raised millions of dollars in equity investment along the way. Of course, this example highlights just of the two creative ways that digital media landscape in Latin America are working to build their own revenue resource. And that is not easy. It's never easy doing something like that. Requires time, capacity building, and investment. And that is one of the most important challenges that we found in our report. That's why we encourage media leaders to build and diversify revenues models that are also made that long-term, that they need a long-term philanthropic investment. And with these examples, we want to show that sustainability requires more than innovation. Of course, these are two successful stories, but there's a lot of small independent media that are struggling to survive. So we always say that media need programs that support the organizational capacity and sustainability, focus in development, technology, finance, and audience development. All these programs are essential to secure the media independence. Equally vital are initiatives that enable media outlets to pool resources, cut costs, and improve productivity through shared solutions, and services that support technology, administration, impact tracking, and other common tasks that can be drained the time and resources of entrepreneurial journalists. And to conclude, I want to say that all of these potential solutions must be adapted to this diverse reality in the Latin America countries, where democratic decline and the rising autocracies place journalists in increased danger, as in all other regions. Not only from government, but in Latin America, it's very important to talk about organized crime. Only if we attend these complexities in these landscapes, we can maybe be able to support these vital voices for accountability and for survive doing their work. So, and we believe they need our support and deserve our support. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Again, so many rich findings in the Latin American chapter, and really you can see how the picture builds through these 4 presentations today. Thank you to all the regional authors for all your work there, and thank you for everyone for all the questions as well that have been coming in, which is great to see. As you sort of expect, the theme of those questions ranges right through to how do you navigate the independence as well as revenues throughout these decision-making processes. And there's also a lot of themes in there to do with diaspora. But in order to draw this to a conclusion, as we are unfortunately out of time, Guy, if possible, I would like to come to you with just one question, which feels like an appropriate way to draw this to a close, is to say kind of what efforts or what additional efforts you think we can and should be doing to make this case of why journalism matters so much, why funding matters so much for public interest media, to donors, to governments and the public.
Well, thank you, Claire, and thanks everyone for really interesting comments and explications. And I've been monitoring the questions as well, which are really interesting. There's such appetite for this, and it's completely understandable. My just takeaway message is that if individuals and entities work on their own and see each other as competitors or as time-consuming detractors, then we're not going to win. We have to recognize that a fragmented approach isn't going to stop this decline. And so we've got to take the time and reallocate some energy into coalitions and networks that can involve other people, including retirees like myself, but also to build towards advocacy, I think, and getting recognition of journalism as a public good and as part of the creative industries. People may have seen that just yesterday, the British Prime Minister recognized media as part of the creative industries. This is really important because it opens a door to public funding then, which of course we know must respect editorial independence, and that's a huge imperative and challenge in some countries. But the point is, we've got to build the advocacy, we have to build the networks, and we have to build the coalitions if we're going to raise the scale of our existing work and make impact.
Thank you, Guy. So as we began the conversation, I really hope you found today rich. Hopefully the report will serve as a compass, as we say, to start these new conversations. There's lots of opportunities to carry on the discussion with the authors. Ross will be presenting his chapter in Chiang Mai, I think next week, as part of Splice Beta. You can talk further with myself and Chris during the Africa Journalism and Media Summit in Zimbabwe, again, a week after next. Zoe from GFMD and Rashweet from IMS will be discussing the chapter of Africa at the Africa Investigative Journalism Conference, with the title of whether or not the sector coordination can remediate broken journalism economics. And hopefully we'll see some of you also towards Perugia at the International Journalism Festival. So please do see this as a beginning. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining, and I obviously extend a huge thanks to everybody at International Media Support who's been involved in making today happen. So thank you very much, and I hope you have good continuations in your days, evenings and mornings. Thank you very much for joining us.
And please share the report.